Good morning, everybody, and welcome to edition what I'm going to recall now Roll Call, which is going to be a early morning show that I'm going to start in the very near future. So this will be the first episode of Roll Call. So I want to thank you guys for joining. We're going to do some interesting things. This will be the second time I'm going to try to stream a interview. This is with the testimony of a detective from yesterday in the uh, at a Montgomery trial. But there's a couple things I just want to go over first before we get into the details of what happened yesterday. Uh, just tomorrow, just note 1 p.m. tomorrow, I have Jerry Williams. She is a former FBI agent, author, and a podcaster. She'll be on the show at 1 p.m. for True Crime with the Sarge. Also, I'd like to welcome all the new members that we have. We had a nice influx of members. And there is if you're thinking about joining, there's a link to the membership in the show notes. And I'm going to be introducing in March 2 new member perks. All right, I'm going to give you a hint on one of them. One of them is going to be guess the crime scene. It's going to be a photo that I have taken or I've gotten from somebody else or from somewhere else, and we're going to work that out for the month and see if we can identify where that crime was, what was involved, who was involved. So it should be pretty interesting to see exactly what happens. And also, Forensic Fura has a birthday tomorrow, so let's give her a shout out and say happy birthday to her a little bit early. So Forensic Fura, happy birthday. So this is, like I said before, this is going to be the first edition of Roll Call. And Roll Call is when in the morning when the cops get together and the sergeant comes out and gives everybody their assignments. Roll Call is different just about, in every place, but the major police departments, it actually is a formal look at this. Now, every time I raise my hand, there's like a disco lights going on. So another reason why I got to keep my hands down. So welcome to if you're watching this live, I really appreciate it. I know it's kind of impromptu. I threw this together. And if you're watching this on the replay, thank you very much too. So I just want to, room's filling up nice, which is nice. So I'm going to just briefly discuss what transpired yesterday with the testimony of Scot Riley. He is a former detective of the Manchester Police Department, and we're going to watch some of his testimony. I have timestamps that I'm going to go through, and there's some things that we're going to talk about. And, listen, chain of custody is always paramount. We're going to discuss that. Did anything happen in his testimony or happen in this case that I think is going to be detrimental to the trial? No, I don't think it's going to be detrimental to the trial. But there's always that saying where it says it's not a problem until it becomes a problem. There are a couple of things that I don't personally like, but that doesn't mean it's going to affect the case in any way. So it's important, though, that police departments going forward take a look at some of their policies and procedures, because there are some issues that could pop up. And I think the defense attorney, we're going to hear from her a little bit later on, but I think she's leading up to something in regards to the chain of custody. Now, if you don't know what the chain of custody is, it's basically the chronological order of what events took place, who had the evidence, and when. And it becomes like the most important part, because if you break that chain of custody and you can't prove who had the evidence when, you have a big problem. And sometimes it can get thrown out of court. And we don't want to see that in this case because of this little girl, Harmony Montgomery, who just had a horrible death. I am trying to save a lot of people from watching this trial if you don't have to, because it is extremely tough. Today's testimony is not terrible. It's not too graphic, but there are some pictures of the crime scene that we'll probably see. Of course, we don't have the body yet, but understand something too. This is what we refer to as a no body case. They are very difficult, but they're not impossible. There are some things that the prosecution is doing that I like. They're setting this up to prove that Harmony is no longer with us, and that there's only one person who could be responsible for this terrible disappearance. So I'm going to share the screen now. I want to start getting into the testimony. So let's just get this thing rolling.
I want to switch gears, Officer Riley, or I'm sorry, Mr. Riley.
I'm still an officer, so it's okay.
Okay. Can you Were you assigned duties in your capacity as a law enforcement officer in the investigation of a missing child, Harmony Montgomery?
I was.
And can you just describe generally your role and involvement on that case?
It began with everybody pretty much in the division, because when it first came in, it was fast paced. They kind of grabbed everybody they could to work on it. So the assignments in the beginning were kind of just, they'd have like a morning meeting and they would decide, you're doing this today. There was nothing specific. And then it morphed into, I was assigned monitoring jail calls, jail mail, jail messages. I was involved in some interviews. I mean, I didn't have like a specific assignment. Whatever was needed, they just assigned it to us, and kind of we ran with it.
Did you say it was all hands on deck?
It was in the beginning, yes.
I mentioned a missing.
Okay, so all hands on deck. He was kind of like, he comes into work, and this happens sometimes. You know, you're dealing with a much smaller police department, so this situation comes down to is basically, everybody, we got to get going. We got to do this thing. We're going to execute this search warrant. We're going to go to this. It's called the Families in Transition Center, and we got information that it actually comes from Kayla, the wife, that Harmony's remains were put in the ceiling of the location. So this happens quite often, where you get kind of lost in what we refer to as almost like the fog of war. However, one of the things that the prosecutor should do here is, and there's a couple of things here that the prosecutor he does very good, and there's a couple of things that he makes the job for this detective much harder, right? So he doesn't supply him, and you're going to see this a couple of times. He doesn't supply him a copy of his reports, and he's asking him for dates and times, and when did this happen and when did that? Who was with you? Listen, I mean, it is extremely difficult to remember all of those details. I don't care if he took his case file and studied it. There are things that you're not going to remember. And, when you're in court, when you're testifying, because I've testified before, you want to understand that, you have to slow these things down. You want to be able to be 100% correct. That's the goal here. So I forgot to mention, this video is from WMUR, which is the Manchester local TV station. And it is just something that it is important to think about. Now, here's the other little thing that I wanted to share with you as I was watching this. The detective talks about, there was a meeting and stuff like that. Okay. Part of the supervisor in the detective squad, which I was, when you set up a meeting like this, you have to make assignments. And part of those assignments is an assignment log where you write down who is where. So, like, for instance, we would do some old school stuff. We had a big, one of those big pads on an easel, and we would write the names down of the detectives of who was going where. Because if you're having people going to the crime scene and you have people going to, let's just say, the house is at a different location, you worry about that cross contamination. And it is an important aspect, because just a throwback, if you look at the OJ case, the detectives were all over the place, and detectives that were at the crime scene end up being at the house, and then they find bloody shoe prints and all the other things that go along with it. So the idea behind giving assignments and making sure you track to know who was there is there's an assignment log, right? So here's where the prosecutor should have had that. Now, if the police department doesn't do that, this is a learning episode. This is a learning thing for them to do. That you need to know exactly where your people are at all times, because you have to try to avoid the cross-contamination. As a matter of fact, later on down the testimony here, they ask that the defense attorney asks him about cross-contamination issues, and actually the prosecutor asks him to define it. So there is something brewing here on the defense side. I don't know exactly where they're headed. I could take a guess. I could speculate where they're going with this, because the evidence, as far as I'm concerned, the circumstantial evidence is kind of overwhelming. And yes, you can convict somebody based solely on circumstantial evidence. So if the defense can get something major thrown out, like these tiles that we're going to talk about, the sheetrock, then it's going to be a very difficult case for the prosecutor. So let's watch a little bit more. I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
Missing persons investigation. Did that change at some point during the course of your involvement?
It did. Yeah.
What did it change to?
It changed to more of a homicide investigation.
Do you recall when your involvement began on the Harmony Montgomery case?
I believe it was the 2 days after Christmas, so it would have been the 12/27 of 2021, if I recall correctly.
At some point in the investigation, did you and the officers with the Manchester Police Department receive information pertaining to the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter here in town?
We did.
And what led you? What information did you receive that led you to that shelter?
I wasn't part of there was an interview that was conducted and information was obtained that maybe that the child was placed in that apartment for a period of time.
You mentioned an interview being conducted. Was that with Kayla Montgomery?
It was.
During your time with the Manchester Police Department, were you tasked with processing that room?
I was.
When did you process that room?
I believe that was June 4th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
Okay. So if you notice here, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? So you're going to hear the detective say a number of times, if I recall correctly. To me, that was like a call for help from the district attorney to say, would you like to see the report that you wrote? Like, here's your report. Take a look at it. Tell me the exact time and date. But there's something else that I want to cover. And it's not about the evidence per se, but the district attorney asks the detective and asks him, this started off as a missing persons case, basically, right? And then it turned into a murder investigation. But he doesn't ask the detective why that happens, right? That comes out after the fact that, they got information from, actually, it's Kayla Montgomery, who, through an interview, said that Harmony's remains were put in the ceiling of the location. So I think the district attorney could have helped out the detective a little better here and given him that opportunity to be able to establish another fact, which becomes extremely important in this trial as far as I'm concerned. But here is the other learning point that I think that not only police departments need to learn this, but I think we need to get some politicians involved. I've talked to a couple of politicians in order to try to get some sort of legislation or a bill drafted saying that when you have a missing persons case, specifically like when you have a very young child or an elderly person or somebody who has disappeared where it appears to be involuntary, that at the initial stages of an investigation, a homicide detective or a detective that has a lot of experience in homicide be assigned to that case immediately, because often these cases do turn out to be homicides. And that kind of experience of an experienced detective who has done lots of murder investigations it becomes really important, because things can be handled differently. Things that that detective knows would be able to help move this case along further. And it's just something that police departments need to adjust to that. They need to think about it. I know personnel always becomes an issue. There's these small departments don't have many people, but it is something that is really important because, Manchester is probably not your hotbed of criminal activity. So they don't have a lot of experience to certain things, which is good. However, when something does happen, they need to be able to respond and they need to be able to do this and do the job correctly. Okay, let's hear more from Detective Riley.
Can you describe your response to the Families in Transition Shelter that day?
We were told to go out there and we were going to complete a search of the apartment. I mean, the crime scene van was involved. It wasn't my case, so I didn't really have any of the planning. I was just kind of, let's go. You're going to help process the scene, and we obviously went out there.
So you mentioned receiving information pertinent to your investigation that may be at the Families in Transition Shelter. Did you, subsequent to that, after getting that information, did you provide a subpoena for documents to the Families in Transition Shelter?
I did.
If I can approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit here because this is a long layover. Hey, look how long this goes. So here's where they're finally giving the reports to the detective to look at.
I'd just like to walk through what those documents are with the jury.
To do
so. Start with the first page, the room information. free to use the screen behind you. Do you see the individual's name in the top left?
Yes.
Can you read that for the jurors?
Adam Montgomery.
In what room does it say Adam Montgomery was staying in?
Room 1.
And what were the dates associated with his stay?
December 30th of 2019 through February 20th of 2020.
Let's go to the next document. This is work order number A11.
Okay, before we get into the work order, so we have another date in our timeline, right? So he talks about the end of December. Because if you remember, the Kayla, the stepmom, said that she didn't remember the last time she saw Harmony was either in November or December of 2019. And if you caught the short I did the other day about the testimony of Officer Pentinen, who did the accident report, where he didn't see a Harmony in the car. Now, some of you have pointed out that she could have been in the car, buried under some of the rubbish that was in the car. We don't know that. We might. I mean, it could be possible. However, we do know that Tabitha was in the car. We know that Kayla was in the car. And we knew that the two boys, I think it was Seamus and Declan, I think it was, were in the car because the police officer writes it on a report. I'm going to do another short video. I actually have a copy of a New Hampshire State accident report. I'm going to show you how that works and where that information comes from. And if I recall correctly, the accident report now for New Hampshire was like 6 to 8 pages. So if you remember when Officer Penton is going, and I'm sitting there watching this going, what? How many pages is this? Because when I used to do this, it was 1 page, front and back. That was it. Now they're up to 6 to 8 pages for an accident report, which is kind of nutty in a way, but it is what it is. But here, let's get back to Detective Scot Riley and some of the things that he found here.
What is the start date of that document?
2/5 of 2020.
What's your understanding of what this document is?
It's a work order for the fit.
And can you read the description on that work order?
It says general other, really cold in units 2 and 5. Come check the thermostat, slight odor when the heat is on. Done on 2/5 of 20.
And what was the unit number associated with that?
Unit 2.
And we'll talk about this later, but are you familiar with the general layout of the rooms in the fit shelter?
Yes.
And let's move to work order number A11079. Which unit number is associated with that work order?
Unit 1.
And that's your understanding of where the defendant was staying.
Correct.
And can you read the general description?
General other, weird smell coming from vents in the unit. Come check it out.
And what was the date associated with?
February 21st of 2020.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the defendant left that room on February 20th?
Correct.
So this is the day after he left?
Correct.
Okay, so here's another important footnote into what's going on. So the neighbor in Unit 2 is complaining about a smell that's coming from the vent and that it was cold and the thermostat needs to be checked. And that's kind of what the first clue, this was, I think it was, if I recall correctly, it's February 1st or 2nd. This one comes from, I guess, the new person that comes in on February 21st, who's also now complaining about a smell that's coming from the vent. So, listen, if you have worked in this business for any length of time, the smell of decomposition or the smell of death, however you want to call it, is unmistakable. Once you've smelled it, you never forget it. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's so bad that you can actually get a reoccurrence years later. And it's happened to me on a couple of occasions. Maybe something triggers it. We don't know. But the issue that comes down to is whether it's from a crime scene, whether it's from a victim that was, who died in their home and nobody knew it. And then you have to walk into that. Or, from seeing numerous autopsies and being in the morgue. It's a smell that you can't forget. And it's something that's very hard to describe. But when a police officer or a detective talks about the smell of death, it's unmistakable. As a matter of fact, if you're around it long enough, unfortunately, you can pick out the difference between an animal and a human. It's amazing. So this detective talks about his experience in regards to that and how he's been to many situations, and I can feel for the guy because I can see like his face, and I can totally understand exactly what he's trying to say. If you caught the interview I did with Barbara Butcher, uh, she talks about it as like basically it's like a strawberry milkshake with garlic and everything else. That's how she described it. If you didn't watch that video, you should check that out. But it is something that is really distinguishable, and you smell it, you know exactly what it is. And we're going to hear from the detective.
Let me approach her.
Just going to skip through it a little bit because he's
39 for identification. Can you take a
He's
look
just
at
showing
each
him
of those
photos.
in a minute?
I'm going to skip through some of it because he's just putting them into order.
Of fit, yes.
And
Okay. Sorry to keep on interrupting, but this is an important learning moment. The crime scene photographer here does a great job. One of the very first pictures, if not the first picture, is the location. If it happens indoors, it's the front of the location with the address on it. All right. So the crime scene photographer here does a great job. The detective is holding his own. Remember, this is a friendly interview because it's the prosecutor, is his case. He wants the detective to be as comfortable as possible. So it is very important for him to make sure he's comfortable. But like I said, he needs to help the guy out a little bit. All right. So let's go through some of the other crime scene photos here.
the individuals that accompanied you that day, do you remember their names?
Some of them.
Okay.
Again,
Detective Stewart Coswick, Ray Hill, Deputy Duffs, William Duffs is his name. Tufts, I'm sorry, Tufts. Detective Dunleavy. There was a couple supervisors there, I think.
So the
Captain
individuals
Layton
that
was
you just mentioned, the majority of them work for the Manchester Police Department.
Yes, all but one. Yes.
Are you aware of where Deputy Tufts that you mentioned?
U.S. Marshals.
Mr. Riley, what did you do when you arrived at the Families in Transition Shelter, FIT shelter? You mentioned that you did some cutting as you were reviewing those images. Can you tell the jurors what you actually did?
So you want me to start from my first observation when I walked in the room, or just the actual cutting?
Let's talk about walking into the room first. If you'll look at the image that's on the screen behind you, states Exhibit 31. What are we looking at there?
Unit 1 and 2. The doors.
Unit 1. I don't know that that's much better, but
this is 01.
Can you? So Unit 1 is on the left, and where's Unit 2?
Right here on the right.
So they're adjoining rooms.
Yes. They're polar opposites from each other. I'm pretty sure they're exactly opposite, like this. The wall separating the two.
I'm sorry, you're on.
Oh, yeah. Sir, you just need to speak into the microphone
sorry.
when you're speaking
Yep,
so
sorry.
that everyone can hear you. I know it's hard, but
Yep.
What did you observe when did you look into the opening that
I
you
did.
created?
I did.
What did you observe when you?
As soon as I removed the cover, I knew I could smell what I know is decomposition. I knew I could smell a dead body, what I believed to be a dead body at the time, or it smelled like decomposition is the best way to describe it.
What is decomposition?
When a person dies, the body starts to degrade, I guess is the best word. It's a smell that you just won't forget.
And can you just tell the jurors what your experience is with that smell?
I mean, I've been to many, many death scenes, many autopsies. I've smelt it many times.
Did you make any other observations when you looked into?
okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So I just wanted to take a quick sarcasm. Thanks for becoming a member. I appreciate that. You won't be disappointed. Well, hopefully you won't be. Anyway, so here is an example of what I was talking about before. So the detective is talking about his experience. He's talking about the smell of death. He can also describe decomposition. He might have been able to do a little better job of this, right? So if I was asked that question, I would just be like, when you die, your body starts breaking down. We know that there's buildup in the stomach area. The stomach starts to turn green. If you've been following my quizzes, you know the answers to these questions already. And because of the fact that you are no longer alive, there's no way to get these gases out. So the body just naturally releases them into the air. And sometimes, depending on the temperature, the body will start to swell. And that is what creates the terrible smell. And it is, like I said, decomposition is unlike any other thing that you can actually think of. So it is the detective does a pretty good job here. And I'm going to let him talk a little bit now because he's going to start talking about the ceiling fan, the area, and we're going to look at the pictures. Then I'm going to stop it again and we're going to discuss exactly what we have. If you think I'm talking too much and not letting him talk enough, just let me know, because I said this is only the second time I've tried this. So I want to see if this format is going out.
To that vent.
I did.
And what were those?
I could see at first that there was, it looked like a stain right close to the edge of the vent. That correct? And I also noted that you can see the sheetrock dust. And I'm sorry if you can't hear me. It's hard to crank my neck around to see this. The sheetrock dust you could tell had been altered. Like you could see in the back, it's all fresh sheetrock dust, probably from when the place was constructed. And this over here appeared to have been something had been in that area.
Mr. Riley, if you don't mind just standing up and actually pointing to that area of dusting that you're discussing.
Right here. You can see here, this is different. It's the composition is very different between the two. It was clear that something was here and not placed over in this area.
And the staining that you mentioned, where is that? If you could point it out on the screen.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You mentioned seeing staining.
Yes.
Where is that on the?
Okay, I'm just going to leave it at this picture for a second. Actually, I'm going to blow it up a little bit. And I think I should still be able to talk, right? You guys can hear me? So this is the picture that I think is like totally the thing that puts it over the top. I mean, you could see and all of the white dust that the detective talks about, except for this area here that actually encroached a little bit on the the other panels here. And you could see this staining. We're going to get to that in a second. And it is, I think this becomes the most important part of the investigation in regards to saying for definitely that the body was there, because we know that DNA has proven that the DNA found on this sheetrock was the that of Harmony. So I just wanted to also give another shout out. Sarcasm, thank you very much for that super sticker. I was really generous of you. Thank you very much. So let's get back to this. This part here, guys. If you didn't see this, this is, I think, becomes the biggest thing that puts the Adam Montgomery trial to rest eventually.
At some point, did you attempt to measure what you were observing in that picture?
To the best, yes, I did.
And is that it?
It is.
About 16 inches across?
Approximately. It varied in size.
Let's talk about what you did next after you observed this area of interest. What did you do?
We, as a team, we obviously decided that we needed to take this, so we cut it. We used just an old school sheetrock serrated knife, and I cut the sheetrock until I got to the metal studs, and then we had to use a reciprocating saw to cut the metal studs you can see in the picture.
Did you take any precautions while you were working on the ceiling?
When I was up in there, I had gloves on, but I didn't go up into the ceiling. You couldn't, because it would collapse. So I didn't really have, other than putting the measuring there, I didn't really have any direct involvement with like the stain. When I started cutting, we changed gloves every time we changed, like when we took the vent down, we changed gloves. When we started cutting, I changed gloves. But I was below the ceiling at this point. I was cutting from below. I wasn't up in the ceiling with it.
Were you wearing a hazmat suit that day, or
I was not.
How about a mask?
I was not.
What were your working conditions like while you were doing this?
It was hot.
It was hot.
It was hot. Yeah, it was very hot.
Sweating.
I was.
How long did it take? You said you removed.
Okay, so here's if I have any complaints, this is one of them, right? So the detective's up there doing his best, right? But the crime scene unit is there. I don't know why he wasn't provided, the protective personal equipment or the PPE to do this, right? I know it's hot, I know it's brutal up there, but there's a possibility that you're going to leave DNA behind, right? Sweating, hair follicles, and the like. Will this be like something that gets this thrown out? No, it won't be. But once again, it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So other police departments need to take heed on this and make sure that they have people who are properly trained. One thing that also I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is that at no time does the district attorney ask Detective Riley what training he had, right? I didn't hear it. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. You can watch the whole thing for yourself because I am jumping around a little bit. But not one time did they ask, what's your training on this? Did you go to any classes? Did you have any formal education in forensics or anything like that? The answer is just, we don't know what those answers are. Is it a big deal? Yeah, it is, right? So, if you remember, I had Carlos Pantoja on, former New York NYPD crime scene investigator, and the amount of training he talked about. It takes years, and it's just something that we want to make sure that the people who are doing this are doing it properly and within proper protocols, so that they don't give defense an opportunity to have something thrown out. Specifically in a case like this, where it's this poor little girl that is a victim. So, like I said, this might be one of my only complaints, but is it going to be detrimental to this entire case or this evidence? No, but you'll see where the detective has to go through extra steps now, which could have been avoided.
Moved a portion of the ceiling. How long did that take?
I would say the actual cutting was probably maybe an hour. The whole time we were up there was or dealing with that, maybe 3 hours. I don't recall the exact times, but it was within a couple hours, I think, probably from the time we removed the vent till the time we actually took the ceiling down.
And so you mentioned actually taking the ceiling down. Is that what it looked like?
It is.
And again, that staining, did it become more apparent once you removed it from the dark area it was in?
It did, because of the lighting. It was.
Do you recall whether that item was given an evidence number?
I know it was. It wasn't tagged by me. My primary focus was just getting it down, and then it was handed off to the team that packaged it and tagged it. And I am helping assisting packaging later, but initially they put it and covered it in butcher paper.
Do you recall having it labeled MER 3D?
That sounds right. Yes.
MER, those are initials this jury heard. Do you know whose initials those are?
Yeah, Detective Rayhill.
That's Max Rayhill.
Correct.
You mentioned butcher paper.
Yes.
Do you see that in this image?
Yes, you can see it through the hole. It's sitting on top of butcher paper.
At what point during your processing did you actually place that butcher paper down?
I didn't place it down. The team that was there did. I was standing on. I had the ceiling. I'm not very tall, so I had to stand on the platform to get to cut. So once we got to the point that I could cut the last metal, we had to have other team members hold it. And then once it was detached from the ceiling, I got out of the way and it was put down on a piece of paper.
Do you know what the purpose was of putting it on paper?
Preserve any evidence that's on it or in it.
Would that be including the items that fell during the cutting?
Correct.
Are you aware of how this portion of the ceiling was handled once you removed it?
I know it was placed in the crime scene van, and then I believe I helped carry it up into the evidence room. And then I didn't have anything to do with it for a period of time after that.
Were you aware of low points in the ceiling while you were processing it?
I don't know what do you mean by low points.
Was it completely level, or do you know?
On the outside, looking up, it was flat. Inside, there was a bunch of different channels because of the metal framing.
I want to talk about how large the ceiling was relative to the overall room size. You documented it, is that right?
I did.
And is that accurate in comparison?
It is.
How did you actually get up there to cut this out?
We used that bed frame.
No ladder?
No, well, we had a ladder there as well because we had to have multiple people, but I stood on that bed frame, and if I recall, I may have stepped off to the ladder. And I know there was some talk about having other people jump in because it was hot that day and it was a lot of manual cutting, but I continued, and just because I was already covered in sheetrock dust, there was no sense getting anybody else.
Okay, so when you look at this picture, you can see the extent of the effort that the detectives made in order to get this piece of evidence. So the idea behind the evidence is, if you're at a crime scene and you can take it, you take the whole thing, right? And this is exactly what they do here. So he talks about a little hand saw to do this, and then they get the reciprocating saw because there was the metal frames that we used, the metal studs to hold up the sheetrock. So they take this huge piece and they just do the entire, basically this whole section of the ceiling. So holy cow, sarcasm! Wow, just gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much. That's unbelievable sarcasm. Thank you. So it's very expansive, and if you notice, the prosecutor here is leading the detective now to the chain of custody. And this is how I started off the episode today. The chain of custody is the most important aspect after you have found the evidence, secured it properly, and now becomes the chain of custody. And remember, I had given you the definition, and it might be a future quiz question. It is the unbroken chronological order of who had the evidence and when they had the evidence, right? So time and people tracked on all of these items that are taken, and it is a very important to do so. So somebody had asked me a question in the chat about why Adam is Mo, why Adam is not doing his trial. It's up to the individual. You don't have to appear if you don't want to. I don't think he's doing himself any favors, but that's my opinion. But there's all kinds of speculation about why he's not showing up. But I think right now the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The key part of this, remember, he pled guilty to 2 lesser crimes because it looks like the entire defense argument is going to be that Kayla was the one behind this and not her client, Adam. But I don't think that's going to work. So Mo, I hope that answers your question. Like Tracy just said, because he's a coward. Yeah, that's one of the things that people have talked about for sure. And it's just this is just a terrible trial, and it is extremely difficult to get through.
Mr. Riley, I want to switch gears. At some point, in your official capacity as an officer with the Manchester Police Department, did you travel to Florida?
I did.
Can you explain that to the jurors, why you did that?
They're trying to figure out how to get this to a lab to test it for DNA or try to figure out what was on this staining. And I know that I didn't myself, but another detective had done some work on this prior to me getting it. I offered to drive it down to Florida because it was too big. You couldn't fit it in a plane. It turned into a mess. So I offered to drive it, and they said sure. So I went and rented a car at the airport, and I know that the size. I remember it being 44 inches wide, and we had to find a vehicle that it would fit in. So we rented a car, and it fit, and I drove straight to Deerfield Park, Florida. I think it's DNA Labs is the name of the
DNA Labs
Yes.
International.
Yes, correct.
And when you say we drove it, who if anyone were you accompanied with?
Detective Bergeron Rosa.
And so you drove it from Manchester to Florida.
We did.
And do you recall the date of that?
I believe that was July 20th of 2022, if I recall correctly.
See, once again, the prosecutor can help out the detective here. Hey, would it refresh your memory if I gave you the report that you filled out on this, right? I mean, there's some times when the detective even says, well, if I had the report in front of me, I would do it. It's like almost it's like saying, hey, dude, just give it to me, right? So, I think he could definitely help out his case here, the prosecutor, by just providing some simple things here. Because to try to remember every small detail, dates and times, and who was there and who wasn't there, is just no, it's not happening. I don't care how young you are. This guy is only a few years younger than me. I walk down to my basement, and I get to the bottom of the basement, and I don't know why I went downstairs anymore. Right? That's the age that I'm at now. So Karen Lee asks a question, says, is there a problem with the fact that the Sebring car in which Harmony allegedly died was sitting in a junkyard for 2 years? It quite possibly could be, right? So it depends, Karen, if if the car was still intact, right? The windows weren't broken or the roof wasn't leaking or what have you, that they still might be able to find some forensic evidence in that car. The technology has changed so much that I'm not going to say yes or no. The possibility exists that they can still find some forensic evidence in that car, just because of the fact that things have changed so dramatically from the times when I was in the detective squad and in the cold case squad. It's absolutely amazing what they can do. So I know it didn't answer it affirmatively, Karen, but I think you can get the gist of where I'm going at, right? I can't say definitively yes or no. So I hope that kind of asks. So yeah, Tarn says there will be questions. I'm going to get to those in a second. Carolyn, thank you very much for that super sticker. I really appreciate that. That is awesome too. Thank you so much. We're going to get back into the testimony because there is some cross that's coming up soon.
Did you stay in Florida or did you come back to New Hampshire?
We stayed overnight. We drove straight through. We didn't sleep on the way down. We drove the whole way.
In your career as an officer, have you ever done something like that, such a long trip?
Personally, yes, many times as a police officer.
I'm just going to skip a little bit here because this is just about a trip to Florida for the lab.
Did you eventually come back with?
Do you recall when you were speaking with Kayla Montgomery?
I would say
Here's the
either
cross now.
the 30th of December or the 4th. I think 12/30 of 2021 is. I may be wrong, but that's kind of in my head.
Okay. Was that at a fit shelter or a recorded interview?
Both. So I talked to her 2 different times, so that may be off by a day. The first time I believe I talked to her. We were at Fit, outside of Fit.
And the second time?
Was at the station.
Okay. And that was a recorded interview?
Correct.
And that was prior to her arrest?
Correct.
Okay. Did you advise her that she could have an attorney?
Yes.
And did you tell her that she didn't have to speak? You wanted to talk to her about missing Harmony?
Yes. I don't know if I did or Detective Dunleavy, but she was advised that it was a voluntary interview. Yes.
Okay. And you talked for a while.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I think it was
And
pretty
then at
lengthy.
some point, I think you all gave her a chance to be alone and write down maybe her thoughts.
Correct.
In case she didn't want to tell you all directly, maybe she wanted to write it down and pull her thoughts together.
That is correct.
Right?
Yes.
And the essence is that and you gave her a fair amount of time, right?
Yes.
And when you came back and looked at the note, it essentially ended the interview.
It did.
Okay. Now another random duty. I don't mean to call it random.
Okay.
You just
It
were
was.
jumping here, there, and everywhere,
Very
right?
random.
And
Okay.
one of the things that you did was, to collect something from the House of Correction that Kayla wrote.
Correct.
Show you what's been marked as Exhibit G. Do you recognize this document?
It's okay to remove it out of here.
Yes, you have it.
Okay. I do recognize it.
What is it?
It's a note that she had. I think they were doing a cell search, if I recall correctly, and they found this in her room,
Okay.
in her cell. Sorry.
Okay. And so essentially, the police department, someone discovered that this note had been seized,
Yes.
and you were assigned to go and take the note
Correct.
And did you talk to the COs and sort of document everything about how that was obtained?
Yes, they had their own report. They provided me with their inside report.
Okay, and do you recall when that was?
I don't. I'd have to see the report. I don't remember the date. I'm guessing early January. I don't recall the date. I have to see it.
If I showed you a copy of a report, would that help
It
refresh
would.
your
It would.
recollection?
It would. It's just too many.
Well, there it is, right? So here you have the defense attorney when the detective says, I don't recall the exact time and date. And here's the defense attorney now going, if I show you the report, will this refresh your memory, right? The defense attorney is actually doing him a favor here, but the prosecutor doesn't. So, this is exactly what I was kind of referring to. And it is just, it's kind of weird what's going on. And I also find her questions, the defense attorney's line of questions, kind of interesting in regards to this, because it almost as if like she's helping sometimes, because I don't know where she's going with some of the stuff. So let's go back to this piece of paper, which they don't tell us what's on it, which is another thing that makes me nuts. But here we go.
Dates to try to
I know.
wrap my head around them. So it was January 31st of 2022.
Okay, and excuse me. From the time that you obtained that note, did you put it into evidence and secure it and all that stuff?
I did.
Okay. And just very, very quickly, I want to talk about securing evidence and why you do it, okay?
Yes.
And why you have these initials and all these bags and stuff. You can't do anything about evidence and what happens and who touches it and how it might get transferred and all that stuff until you collect it, right?
Correct.
If you want to preserve something in the exact condition that you want it to be in, you can't affect what happened before, right?
That's correct.
So all you can do is take what you have available, and from that moment, you can preserve it.
Correct.
Any changes an item might have gone through, any transfer of evidence back and forth, you can't affect that.
I cannot.
But from the moment that you collect it, you're gonna make sure that there's virtually no changes in that item, right?
Correct.
And one of the ways that you do it is to collect it and put it in a container.
Correct.
Okay, it might be something like an evidence bag,
Could be.
and it might be something more, it might be an envelope if it's just a document.
Could be.
And
Yes.
in that one, you put it in that clear evidence bag?
I believe this was their evidence bag, but I don't recall if it's ours or theirs. This doesn't look like our bag, but it may have been. We have many different types, so I don't recall if this was mine or theirs.
Okay.
It probably was ours because I believe I took.
Okay, so here's one of the issues that I have with this now. So they secured the evidence. Here's the deal, right? Everything that could have biological fluids, blood, semen, the like, saliva, goes in paper, right? That's always the standard because it can then make sure that it breathes, right? The paper breathes and actually can air dry it naturally. So that's that. Everything else can go into a security envelope. When you're dealing with a document, as long as the document doesn't have to be fingerprinted or DNA test for touch DNA and stuff like that, you could put it in plastic, right? If there's going to be testing done, it's probably a good idea to put it in some sort of plastic, some sort of paper bag or a cardboard box or something like that before testing. And that's something that it just gets done now. We learned this over the decades about, condensation built up and degrading DNA and all the other things that go along with it. So it's an important aspect of here. But the one thing that I'm not digging, I don't really like is that the detective can't pick out that his own department security envelope. Now, I don't know why that the security envelopes don't have the department's name on it. I find that strange. Maybe that's something that needs to be addressed at the department level, the executive level. That your security envelope should have Manchester Police Department across it. It should also have the case number and the file number and the detective's name. Start that chain of custody on it because, here we are discussing this. Will it become a major issue? I don't know where the defense is headed with this, but I'm sure it's going to be brought up again. So it's important, like these little things, such as having your department's name on the security envelope, can help prevent future problems in your testimony and your cases moving forward. That's just my opinion, right? There are some that might disagree with me, but that's fine. I mean, listen, do I have all the answers for everything? No, of course not. But this is just from my observations and looking at, potential problems in training and in other issues across the country. So it's something that needs to be addressed as far as I'm concerned. All right, let's continue with this cross.
Copies of this. So I believe this would be our bag. I may be mistaken.
And that's a plastic bag.
It is.
So you try and collect it and preserve it in the container appropriate for that evidence.
Sure.
For instance, you wouldn't put the tile in plastic because that might cause
Condensation.
and affect the condition of the item within there, right?
Sure. Yes.
So you're not so worried about condensation with a piece of paper.
Correct.
Okay. And then when you collect it, the jury has seen items open and it has red tape. This one is sealed just as a product of the bag it's contained in, right?
Correct.
But other evidence items might have some tape on it.
Sure.
And the reason for the tape is that you are securing the evidence and letting anybody know, once this is taped, that nothing is going to change that item unless we can track it, right?
Sure.
For instance, if evidence has been taped with Manchester Police Department tape, then something might be sent to the lab for checking, right?
Sure.
And the lab would have to open an item to test an item, right?
Correct.
And so when the lab opens whatever packaging that you have retained a piece of evidence in, they actually don't open from the top, right?
I don't do that. I have no idea how they open it.
Sustained.
Okay, so one of the purposes of the different color tapes is to be able to track when an item of evidence has been opened from its packaging.
I use whatever color tape is available. I don't use it for tracking. I use it to seal the item. That's the only reason I do it.
Okay, so if somebody comes along later and opens the item, they have to reseal it to indicate that it's been gone in and then keep the tracking. You don't do that?
Overruled.
I don't reopen evidence. I don't know that I guess it's possible it could happen, but I wouldn't necessarily use a different color tape if I did.
Okay,
I would cut it in a different area. I would tape it and then initial it after.
okay. So you would cut it in a different area so that somebody knows that it has been opened from the original sealing.
Sure.
And then you would tape it in that second area, right?
Sure.
And you would do a report that documented the fact that for whatever reason you had to go into the bag that contained the item of evidence.
Sure.
So that anybody that wants to know, has there been any changes to this item of evidence, we can track anybody who has had access
It's
to it.
reasonable. Yes.
Okay. But there's nothing you can do about anything before you collect an item of evidence.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just break down what's going on here. This is where I think she's setting up a future argument down the road for a chain of custody issue. She's asking pointed questions to the detective, right? About collecting the evidence, getting your name on it, securing it, the tape, right? The colors of the tape really don't mean anything. But the issue that comes down to is that I think this is where she's eventually headed with the evidence, right? That there was a chain of custody issue. Remember, it's the chronological, unbroken record of who had what. You have to have a list of every individual that has touched this evidence in regards to after it's done. So what she's actually referring to is something called evidence dynamics. And evidence dynamics is that you have no control over the evidence at the crime scene. A lot of things can happen. So, for instance, let's just say there's a body at the scene. EMS comes in because they have to pronounce the person dead, which is in most places that you have to have an EMS or a doctor make the pronouncement. They don't want the cop to do it because, there's been situations where they said, yeah, the guy's dead, and then find out hours later that the guy's still alive. So it's required generally in most locations, if not all, EMS or a doctor to do so. But when they, let's say, roll over the body or they attach, what's that thing called? Anyway, the issue that comes down to is you're changing the dynamics of the crime scene, which is no control over the detective, right? You can't tell the guy, listen, don't try to help him. That's something that has to be done. So an item can be kicked across the floor. It could be moved. Things could be left at the scene by EMS workers, like gloves and stuff like that. That's what evidence dynamics is. And, it's important that detectives should know this, because if you're getting a line of questioning, like what this defense attorney is doing, it would be a good idea, right, at this point, and say, what you're referring to is evidence dynamics and that we don't have any control over that at the scene, right? So that would have been a good response to let her know that you know exactly what you're talking about and where she's headed. Now, if you notice something else about this, if you remember, I'm not going to go back, because if I go back, I don't know if I'll ever get back to where I have to I have to be. But when she handed the detective the envelope and he asked her, can I take it out? It wasn't sealed, right? So here you have these two documents he removed. If you saw him, he removed two documents from there that it wasn't sealed. And I'm kind of like figuring out, did they open it up and hand it to him? Did they break the seal and give it to him? I don't know. I didn't see it or I didn't hear it. And to me, that's another kind of issue that needs to be addressed in regards to that. The detective did say that he made photocopies of it. The prosecutor should have stepped forward and say, listen, I have a copy of what those notes are, but we still don't know what's on those notes, right? We don't hear about it. So that's just something else that it kind of gave me a little bit of a red flag. Will it change anything? No, because we don't even know what's on the note. So I'm just pointing out some potential issues here, or moving forward, we'll see what the defense is actually planning, because she needs to get rid of this evidence, specifically that evidence in the ceiling, because unfortunately, it's come back to Harmony, that evidence that she was definitely, her body, her remains were up in that ceiling. So, and there's no questioning that. The results have come back, and it's absolutely positive that it's her. So she's going to have a big problem if she can't do anything. So right now she's going to plan on attacking the police, attacking the investigation, attacking the securing of evidence, the testing of evidence. That's where this is headed. I'm almost 100% sure. So it's just something to think about what's going on. And as the trial moves forward, like I said, I'm going to try to keep on top of this, but there's some other things that are going on, like school and stuff, that I can't really watch a lot of these things. But if you guys hear about this piece of paper with the note that they got from corrections, shoot me an email, or shoot me a DM. Just let me know what's going on if you see something, because I can't be on top of all these things, and I actually require a lot of help, because I am a one-man show still. All right, so let's get back to the defense. It's we're winding down now. The last couple minutes.
Thank you, Officer.
Yes, officer.
Officer Riley, you were asked about interviewing Kayla Montgomery, and you mentioned that interview ended.
It did.
Can you tell the jurors why that interview ended?
She said that she didn't want to talk anymore and she wanted to get an attorney.
She asked for a lawyer.
She did.
Note G, Exhibit G, that note that was collected. Are you sure about who collected it, who put it in that plastic bag?
I think I would have, because I believe I took photocopies. I don't recall if I did photocopies or they gave me photocopies. That's why I'm unsure whether I put it in that bag or someone else.
When you say they may have given you photocopies, you also said it may have been their bags. Who is they?
The
they that you're referring
Valley
to?
Street Jail, Hillsborough County House of Corrections.
Note G also talks about her wanting to speak to her attorney, right?
Correct.
You were asked about the handling of evidence, packaging. You were asked about cross-contamination. Do you know what cross-contamination is?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what cross-contamination is?
Well, it depends on the item of evidence, but I mean, cross-contamination could be anything from blood to DNA to, I mean, I'm not sure what.
Specifically with respect, and let me back up. You were asked about tiles. Did you collect tiles from that fit shelter?
Tiles. They were collected, yes. I didn't physically collect them, but yes, they were collected.
You collected the ceiling.
Yes.
And this wasn't ceiling tiles. This was the actual ceiling.
This was drywall. Yes.
Do you remember what the drywall was connected to?
It was connected to metal studs, metal framing.
Metal framing.
Yes.
So that's what you collected.
Yes.
After that collection, did you volunteer a DNA sample?
If needed, yes, I did.
Why was that?
Because it was sweating so much, it was nearly impossible to try to measure and take pictures of that stain. I mean, it was just the sweat was running down my face. So I wasn't sure if I could have sweat and dropped any in that opening when I was up in there.
Is that pretty standard when you're collecting items of evidentiary value, of potential evidentiary value, that you volunteer such a thing?
Yes.
And that's for many detectives, correct?
Yes.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Okay, which could have been avoided, right? If they had proper PPE to do this, that, and, trained crime scene workers and that kind of stuff. But he answers out, the prosecutor answers out, like, the issue is about why you aren't wearing PPE. And this is why I say it doesn't become an issue, but it doesn't become an issue until it becomes an issue, right? So these things that police departments can do in order to stem off some future challenges, because like I said, the circumstantial in this evidence in this case is overwhelming, and you don't want to lose pieces of evidence out because the way it was collected and the way things were handled. That's silly at that point. You did the work, document it, take your photographs, and make sure it's secured and maintain that chain of custody. That's basically what what the plan is, and all those little minor steps that happen in between, are really important. So it's just something that they need. It needs to be addressed, and even in Manchester Police Department after this case, but it definitely needs to be addressed, and probably lots of other places too. So let's continue here.
Sorry. The prosecutor asked about how the December 31, 2021 interview ended, and with that note, and you said that Kayla asked for an attorney?
Is that the recorded interview?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, she said it. She wrote in the note that she wanted an attorney. Yes.
Okay, but the note contained a lot more than I want an attorney. The note contained what she said
Yeah.
her story was.
Yes.
That Adam had driven off with Harmony, and she,
Approach.
Okay, so I'm not going to stop it because there's only a few minutes left, and we'll just let that play out, and then we'll come back to where it's happening. So, the defense attorney, I think, is trying to come up with her plan here, or a strategy about the evidence and about the different things that the police have recovered in this, and it becomes another part of this case down the road in regards to doing that. So, the detective's done a pretty good job, right? He's handled himself. I think, like I said before, that the DA could have helped him out a lot more in regards to refreshing his memory with some of the paperwork. But do I believe that there's a chain of custody issue here? No, I don't. I just think that, you have to be mindful of that in regard to, a case when you're starting to deal with many different forms. I didn't get a chance to refer to it. We could bring it now, but they had that, what they call the butcher paper, that brown paper that's used in a lot of cases. and it's just there to collect any evidence that might fall from the ceiling as they're doing it. So it could be like hair follicles and everything else that goes along with it. And this poor guy had to give a DNA sample because he was sweating all over the place, and they needed to get it. And we refer to that as an elimination sample, which, by the way, might be a good future quiz question, right? So there's lots of different DNA exemplars. You have the suspect sample, you have the victim sample, you have an elimination sample, and you have an abandonment sample. Those are basically like the 4 types of DNA exemplars, right? Examples or representations. So you know what? That will be a future quiz question or two for sure. So it is just to give you guys the heads up on that. There's another quiz dropping today as an extra credit quiz, 4 p.m. today. Tomorrow will be a poll, and then Monday through Saturday, it looks like I'm going to be giving you 6 quiz questions every week going forward. Those are, I think you have to be a subscriber to answer those, but you don't have to be a member. Those are all free. You just have to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in doing those quizzes. They're a lot of fun. A lot of people are doing them, so I'm actually been excited about that. And I hear other channels are doing them now too. So, listen, what's that thing they said? When people copy you, it's a serious form of flattery. So yeah, I don't mind. People send me messages. Oh, they're doing this, they're doing that. Okay, no problem. It is what it is, right? Just everyone can. There's so much room for everybody.
So
out
the
here.
note that essentially entered the interview included that she wanted a lawyer, right?
Correct.
But it also included that she didn't know anything more. Go talk to Adam. He wouldn't talk to her.
Yes.
Sorry about my misreference to the ceiling tiles.
So it's okay.
And again, that volunteer of the DNA sample is a lot of stuff can affect an item, and you want to make sure if there's an item of evidence that is revealing information that nobody understands, that they can check your DNA, compare, and see maybe it's that versus something else.
Correct.
If there's a question about perhaps DNA being found.
Correct.
Okay. And by the way, note G that you collected from the COs. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. That was not the note we're talking about in the interview. That was the note where Kayla had listed her desires in talking to the AGs.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me step down.
Okay, so that effectively ends the interview of the detective, or the debriefing of the detective, and they let a little bit of that little piece of paper that he removed from the security envelope that they got from corrections, is that basically it's kind of says that she, me, and Kayla wants to talk to the AG, right, the Attorney General, in regards to the case, probably looking to make a deal at that point, and that's the reason why it was collected. I don't know for sure, but that's just what it sounded like just there at that point. That's the defense attorney brought it up because remember, her job is going to be basically saying that the evidence was collected, wasn't collected properly, it wasn't handled properly, the testing is all because of that is moot, fruits of the poisonous tree, you name it, we're going to hear it all. And then also the fact that Kayla gets off on any culpability, she takes immunity. So of course she's going to, she's an agent of the state. She's going to be doing all this stuff. That's the argument, as we know, going forward and doing in regards to what this case is. So, this was just a break down some of the cop speak, looking at some maybe improvements for future things. As you guys know, I do a lot of writing. I've written a textbook on criminal investigation. It's in the 4th edition, but I'm thinking for the 5th edition, bringing up some points in cases, because I do that in the books. I bring up some cases, and I can take a look at this once the case is over and write about it and saying that these are areas that we could use improvement, and not only for Manchester, of course, but other police departments across the country. Because remember, most police departments have fewer than 25 sworn officers. And it's not everybody is, the size of the NYPD or Miami or Chicago or LA. They're very small departments. Training is lacking, all these different things. Even in 2024, I can't believe that we're still talk about some of these issues. We should have learned by now about how to handle these situations a little bit better. But, will this affect the outcome of this case? No, I really don't think so. I think that the evidence is overwhelming, and it's just something that, we're going to see forward. So, moving forward, if there is any more debriefings of investigators of the police, whatever, I'm going to hop on and I'm going to do this. Remember, my new morning show is going to be called Roll Call, and I have to get a hold of Stevie and see if he can make me a banner, or not a banner, but a thumbnail kind of thing for it. And I want to thank everybody here who donated today. I really appreciate that. And someone had asked about their quizzes. Yes, I give a quiz every day from Monday through Saturday now at 4 p.m. Eastern time. They drop at the same time every day, and they're found under the community tab. And okay, I have another question coming in here from Broken. It says, do you think her plea deal is one of those where they give a deal to the first to flip because the unalive part is so weak without Kayla? That's generally the way it goes, Broken. But it comes to the point, right? It becomes he said, she said. It's a great question, and could that possibly be the reason why they gave it? Yeah, possibly, right? She's the first one to get the deal. She writes the AG because listen, she could have definitely been charged with an accessory to the case for sure when you're seeing and hearing exactly what happens. But there was one interesting point in yesterday's. I don't get into the kind of other parts of the trial where it doesn't involve the police, but since you brought it up, Broken, there's a woman that was taking the both of them to the methadone clinic. When I'm both of them is Adam and Kayla taking them to the methadone clinic to get their methadone. She said that Kayla had visible bruises on her eyes, right? So it looked like a black eye kind of thing. She also said that she tried to give her the phone to make a phone call. And Adam, she said she talked about it. She saw his rage and he grabbed the phone and twisted it out of her hand and everything like that. So there is a strong indication that Kayla is a victim of domestic violence in so many different aspects, and could be one of the reasons why she feared from doing this. Now, that is pure speculation on my point. We don't know for sure, but they finally started touching on that yesterday. So I think that it will be developed more in the trial going on, and it's just something that you should be looking for. And it's just something that goes along exactly what's happening. So unless somebody else has another question, we're going to, so hang on a second, Hetty, can they, no, thank you. Hetty had a question here. Can they change her sentence at all, making it longer? She's got the perjury charge. She's going to get out relatively soon. But the only problem that she could have is if she is caught lying, then the deal is off, right? So if she messes up her queen for the day, which we used to call queen for a day, where you basically have immunity. You could say you were the second gummit on the grassy knoll and nobody could do anything about it. But if you get caught violating the agreement, the deal's off and then she could be charged also. But I don't know if that's going to go that route. But she is, listen, they're not likable characters. When you see this 5-year-old, it just automatically turns people off. And I think she has a real public persona problem, and that's not going to help her. But that's not reason, that we can say that she's innocent or guilty. That only happens in the court of law. And I know the court of public opinion is far worse than any court that you can do. So, hold on a second here. It says, thoughts on someone watching the trial called into the tip line? Yes, we're hearing something about this now. Things could get dicey. You have to just remember that this is a national case. Things can happen, and it is something that we're going to look for. I'm not going to really talk too much about the tip line stuff because it is, right now it's going to be speculation about what the tip actually says. And so, yes, have I ever been on the stand? Yes, Karen, I have been on the stand. I have testified in court for sure. And it's something interesting. So, yeah, I agree with Raul here. She's not going to get the kids back. Yeah, there's no way. That's a whole other story, right? What we do with Bureau of Child Services or whatever they call it up there, big problems in regards to how this case was handled. So is that. So listen, I want to thank you for joining me for the first episode of Roll Call, which will be not every day. Of course, I don't have the time for that. I wish I do, but it'll be a morning session. And we will talk about the specific case, something like this that happens the day before. The day after something happens, we could break it down and we could do this. I want to thank you all for the generous donations and for those of you that came to watch the live. And if you're watching this on the replay, thank you very much. AJ, thank you for the gifts. It depends on what service you're using, an iPhone and this and that. Things are a little screwy, but I appreciate it all. Thank you very much, and thanks for spending your Saturday morning. So remember, tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, former FBI agent Jerry Williams is going to be joining me live. All right, folks, you have a great Saturday. Enjoy the snow. If you're living up in the Northeast, we got more. Make a snowman with the kids. Take them out for hot chocolate. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.